True crime TV shows and podcasts have been a guilty pleasure for quite some time, and our next guest knows a thing or two about the genre. Em Schulz, the host of the award-winning comedy and true crime podcast, And That's Why We Drink, is here today to talk about their paranormal experiences. Plus, Em's getting into how they're championing for inclusivity in the true crime podcast world. This is Advocate Now. We're so excited to have you with us, Em, and you have built an incredible following through your podcast. But to go back to the beginning, how did you first get into paranormal activity and true crime?
Well, I personally got into the paranormal world at 7. I saw my first ghost, and I think later that day I told my mom I wanted to grow up and be a Ghostbuster, and I think she was like, okay, well, good luck with that, and it actually worked out. So in college, my college career was I became a paranormal investigator. It was like a great college gig, and it was very spooky and right up my alley. And so when I ended up meeting my future co-host, who was really into the true crime world, we just kind of paired our interests together. Since I used to be a paranormal investigator, she was actually a private eye for a little bit, and she was all about true crime since she was a little kid, I guess, which is an odd interest, but I'm not going to judge. And the two of us just pair nicely, I think. So that's how the show came to be.
After that initial experience at 7 years old, have you had many other personal experiences with the paranormal world, especially working in this field? Yeah.
Yes,
Countless.
countless. Even last night, I just did an investigation, and we ended up using different sorts of equipment. We got a hold of the original owner of the house, and we were able to ask if it was okay with us being there. It said no, and so we left very quickly. But no, to this day, I still have weird things happen to me. I've been scratched before, which wasn't that great, but I've also had some really lovely moments where I've been hugged by people. I've smelt really nice perfume in the air. I've felt pats on the back. We've gotten all sorts of stuff.
Does it ever scare you or freak you out, or are you so used to it now?
It definitely, I don't think that instinctive fear ever goes away, where if you're in a space and I don't want to go into that room or something's staring at me, it never feels good. But I think over the years, I've gotten used to setting myself some sort of some spiritual boundaries where I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to involve myself in things that my gut is telling me to avoid. So maybe in the beginning it was scarier, but now I just am very quick to, if I feel something creepy in the air, I kind of just go, no, thank you. I'm not interested in that. I'm just here for the good parts of it. And hopefully I walk away unscathed.
Now, the podcast has a comedic spin. What made you want to merge the two worlds of comedy and true crime?
Well, at the time, I feel like now it seems to me, maybe just because I'm part of that world, but it feels like everybody has some sort of true crime comedy podcast, and I am very aware of the controversial opinions, the polarizing opinions of that. Where should you really be incorporating comedy with true crime? Are you exploiting victims? And we try to take that very seriously on our show, and so the strategy we take is that it is a comedy show where we're making fun of ourselves in the middle of talking about very serious things. So the comedy is never directed at victims. It's never disrespectful. We try really hard to be as inclusive as possible in every way. And the humor really comes from us maybe spilling our drink as we're talking, or, part of the story will remind us of our own sidebar experiences. So it's to bring a little levity and give you breaks in between the hard to swallow pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it can be very uplifting to infuse that comedy, especially we all go through difficult times. How would you say infusing that has shaped your career and even life in general?
I think really, I mean, it's definitely been very useful to try to bring respectful humor at least into it. And humor in general has made my life a lot easier. I grew up in I think a therapist would love to pick my brain and say that I probably went through a lot as a child where I now use humor to either deflect or maybe in a way where I feel like humor at least keeps people around in some way. And so I've kind of learned the ins and outs of it I like to think, pretty early on, and it's made the show very useful in that people feel like it's more palatable to hear these awful stories while being able to educate them on these things. But in real life, it's also helped me get through things like my own identity journey, my sexuality, my relationships, pretty much all over the place. It's been nice to be able to insert some levity into the dark parts of, just living life. Existence isn't always beautiful, and humor is helpful along the way.
Oftentimes we see one type of person in the true crime space. Being non-binary, are there any hurdles that you've had to overcome regarding that?
I think unintentionally. I think we're still in a world where a lot of people don't totally know their place or the right vernacular, and so I accidentally get misgendered a lot. Or, really one of the bigger challenges has been when we first started the podcast, which was 6 years ago now. I actually wasn't out as non-binary, and so I was just in the beginning of figuring out what gender even meant to me. And so at the time, I identified as a cisgender lesbian and who used she, her pronouns. And now I am far from that. And she, her is like the only pronoun I really just don't like to hear about myself. So it still comes out every now and then when people are starting the podcast for the first time. I will get posts and comments using, misgendering language, and they don't mean to, but and they don't know any better because they haven't caught up with the show yet. But I think actually one of our biggest flaw, or one of our biggest challenges, has actually been like almost how supportive our fans are, that they every now and then accidentally attack new listeners because they're trying to be defensive of me, which I appreciate it, but we've had to come onto the show and be like, just say it gently, people don't know. And so it's weird that like my biggest challenge has actually been how supportive my fans are.
It's a great challenge to have.
Yeah.
Tell us about your gender identity journey, why you decided to come out as non-binary.
So, well, when I always knew I was only attracted to women or femme presenting people since childhood. But when I came out as gay in high school, it was just because at the time I grew up in my original coming out 10 years ago in the South. It wasn't really the most pleasant spot to be in to come out, and it wasn't a very safe place to come out. But at the time, the language I had grown up with was either you're gay or you're straight, and bi was like the new scary word people knew. And so there was just no language for whatever I was feeling. The closest I had was gay. And I remember as a kid, I even thought, oh, I wish I were a boy so I could be this girl's boyfriend. Or I wish I was a boy for this and this. And I think I just kind of explained it in my own head of like, oh, I wished I was a boy because they get to be with women. And that was why I wanted to be a boy, but not for any other reason at all. So when I found out gay was a thing, I thought, oh, well, maybe that's what I meant this whole time by saying I wished I was a boy. Then I got to college. I learned what transgenderism was, and I went, oh, wow, well, that sounds a lot more in line with what's going on here. And so I started coming out to people as trans. And at the time, I thought I was fully going to transition to the complete opposite side of the spectrum. And that was because that was now the newest word that I had that felt more similar to how I aligned. And as I was transitioning, I was like, I don't actually feel fully male. And then I discovered the word non-binary. And so, I still feel like I'm on this journey because as soon as I think I finally have settled nicely in with an identity, a new word comes up that better explains what's going on. So I think there's really, it's weird to be coming out in such a long process, because the more we learn about the spectrum and that there is a spectrum, what all the words are, I feel like labels are coming out every day that are helping people better define themselves. So I feel like my identity will just never stop shifting because there's always new stuff happening.
Absolutely. Thank you for everything that you're doing, Em, and for entertaining us and adding humor to it. Everyone needs to check out Em's podcast, and That's Why We Drink. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Sonia Baghdadi. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com.